The story of what happened inside that lonely wooden cabin began long before the tragedy itself, before the panic, before the shouting, before the forest swallowed three voices that had once sworn never to abandon one another. It began with a reunion that, to everyone who knew them, seemed long overdue. A healing moment between three best friends whose childhood stories could fill a lifetime. But what none of them knew, not until it was far too late, was that this reunion would also become their undoing. For almost 20 years, Evan, Marcus, and Tyler had been described with a single phrase: the inseparable three. They lived on the same street, attended the same school, survived the same teenage mistakes. If you saw one, you saw the other too. They grew up inventing secret handshakes, dreaming of shared futures, and signing unwritten vows of loyalty that felt unbreakable. But adulthood has a way of testing vows, sometimes gently, and sometimes violently. To be why their late 20s, the three friends had drifted apart in ways none of them could fully explain. Careers, relationships, personal failures. Life had slowly carved invisible distance between them. Messages that once arrived daily became occasional. Calls became rare, and visits they practically disappeared. But everything changed one cold morning in early December that Evan's mother passed away after a long battle with illness. She had been like a second mother to Marcus and Tyler, the woman who fed them when they stayed too long, who scolded them when they fought, who reminded them to stick together even as adults. Her death pulled on something deep inside all three men. It stirred memories they had buried and emotions they had ignored. At the funeral, the three friends stood side by side for the first time in almost 3 years. They hugged, but the embrace was awkward. They spoke, but their words were careful, fragile. And yet, underneath the politeness, there was a powerful undercurrent. Guilt. Guilt for drifting apart. Guilt for breaking promises. Guilt for letting time sever something that was once sacred. That was Marcus who suggested the cabin trip, that a family-owned cabin deep in Pine Ridge Forest, quiet, isolated, untouched by the outside world. A place they had visited once as teenagers. A place filled with memories they thought would never fade. Marcus said it would help them reconnect. Tyler agreed instantly. And even though Evan hesitated, still grieving, still raw, he eventually nodded. Maybe this was what they all needed. A weekend away, just the three of them. No responsibilities, no complications, no hidden resentments creeping in. But reunions can be deceptive, especially when they are built on unresolved pain. When the men set off on that Friday afternoon, the air carried a strange mix of anticipation and tension. Evan drove, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual. Marcus talked the most, trying to fill the silence. Tyler stared out of the window, thoughtful, his expression unreadable. All three were trying to be who they once were. But adulthood had left cracks, and those cracks were beginning to show today as they drove deeper into the rural outskirts. The roads narrowed, and the trees grew taller. The forest felt dense, almost watchful. Evan commented on it casually, but Marcus dismissed it with a laugh. Still, Tyler's eyes lingered on the shadows between the trees. The cabin itself stood exactly as they remembered, aged wooden, with a quiet stillness that felt both peaceful and unsettling. No neighbors for miles, no cell phone reception, just the wind slipping through the branches and the soft crunch of snow beneath their boots. Inside, dust coated every surface, but the familiarity brought a strange comfort. Old deer antlers still hung above the fireplace. The wooden table still bore the carvings they had etched as teenagers. Their initials intertwined, now faded but not forgotten. For a while, it felt right. It felt like stepping back into a simpler time. They shared drinks, laughed about old memories, talked about life, regrets, the years that had passed. The emotional walls slowly began to lower, and by evening they were sitting around the fireplace, the glow of the flames painting their faces in shifting light. And then the laughter faded. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a candle running out of wick. Evan brought up something the others weren't expecting, something raw and painful. He talked about his mother's final days, about how lonely he felt, about how he wished they had been there for him. Marcus apologized, but his voice carried defensiveness. Tyler remained silent, his jaw clenched at a silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. This was the moment investigators would later describe as the emotional breakpoint, a shift so subtle that none of the men recognized it at the time. A fracture in the reunion. A reminder that some wounds don't heal simply by revisiting the past. Tyler eventually spoke, revealing his own struggles. Lost job, failed relationship, depression he had kept hidden for years. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Marcus tried to comfort him, but something in Tyler's tone hinted at resentment toward both of them. The reunion was no longer purely nostalgic. It had turned into an emotional storm. And in the center of that storm, one idea surfaced, an idea that would change everything that followed. Marcus leaned forward and said quietly, "Guys, maybe we should promise each other something. Something real. Something binding. We've already lost too much to distance." Evan looked confused. Tyler avoided eye contact. Marcus continued, "Let's make a pact. No matter what happens in our lives, we face it together." It sounded innocent on the surface. Three men grieving, wounded, trying desperately to reclaim what they once had. A pact of loyalty. A pact of unity. Investigators believe this moment planted the seed. A seed that would grow into obsession, paranoia, and ultimately violence. Because sometimes when people are hurting, they cling too tightly. They try to control what cannot be controlled. They make promises that their emotions cannot sustain. And in a lonely cabin miles from anyone who could intervene, those promises can become dangerous. As the fire burned lower and the forest darkened outside, the three friends sealed their agreement. They raised their glasses. They vowed to repair everything broken between them. They promised loyalty, honesty, and unshakable unity. But the human heart is unpredictable. What the men didn't realize was that each of them interpreted the pact differently. Evan saw it as emotional support. Tyler saw it as a lifeline. Marcus saw it as an unbreakable obligation. And when a bond is interpreted three different ways, it is already fractured. By midnight, the snow began to fall outside the cabin. The fire crackled softly. And inside, three men who once trusted each other more than anyone else on Earth had unknowingly taken their first step toward a tragedy that would leave investigators speechless. They came to the forest to heal. But the reunion that should have saved them would soon become the beginning of their end. The cabin stood at the edge of Pine Ridge Forest, surrounded by tall, ancient trees that whispered whenever the wind shifted. For decades, it had belonged to Marcus's family, a quiet retreat used for weekend escapes, summer memories, and the kind of childhood adventures the three friends once lived for. But time has a way of reshaping places, just as it reshapes people. And when Evan, Marcus, and Tyler returned after nearly 15 years, the cabin was no longer just a nostalgic hideaway. That IT felt different, heavier, as though the walls remembered something the men didn't. The friends arrived just before sunset, the sky washed in deep orange and fading gold. The final few miles of the drive were rough and uneven, with long stretches of road swallowed by forest on both sides. The deeper they drove, the more nature seemed to close in around them. Cell service faded, GPS froze, and silence replaced the casual conversations from earlier. When they finally reached the cabin clearing, the air felt colder, sharper than the December wind should have been. Evan noticed it first and shivered as he stepped out of the car. Tyler paused near the treeling, his eyes fixed on something unseen. Marcus, despite his earlier confidence, hesitated before unlocking the cabin door. Inside, the cabin felt untouched by time. Dust coated the wooden surfaces, and the faint scent of pine and old books hung in the air. The fireplace remained stacked with logs, just as Marcus's father used to leave it. A photo of the cabin from the 1970s still hung crooked on the wall, and carved into the table, beneath years of scratches, were the faded initials E+M+T. That IT should have felt comforting. It should have felt like coming home. But something about the stillness made all three of them uneasy. Marcus tried to brush it off, laughing as he opened windows to let in fresh air. Tyler stayed unusually quiet. Evan walked around slowly, touching old furniture as though confirming it was real. And yet, every few minutes, all three glanced toward the windows, toward the shadowed forest outside that a caretaker lived a few miles away, an older man named Isaac Reeves. He had watched over the property for decades and knew the cabin better than anyone alive. He visited just before nightfall, bringing extra firewood and checking the locks. His presence added something unexpected to the atmosphere, an unspoken warning. Investigators later noted that Isaac's statements were consistent, though unsettling, that he said the forest had changed. He said winters in Pine Ridge brought the kind of silence that could make the mind restless. He said the cabin carried memories, some pleasant, some not. And before he left, he told the three friends something that none of them would forget. If you hear anything in the woods at night, don't go looking for it. The forest remembers everything that enters it. It sounded like folklore, an old man's superstition. But the look in his eyes told another story. A story the friends chose not to ask about. When night fell, the cabin transformed, the temperature dropped rapidly, and the wind howled through the trees like distant cries. The wooden floor groaned as if shifting beneath their feet. The forest outside seemed to grow darker than darkness itself. Marcus turned on the lanterns. Tyler added more logs to the fire. Evan checked the windows twice, then a third time. Inside the cabin, old memories resurfaced. Sleepovers, ghost stories, promises spoken under the glow of firelight. But there was something else layered beneath those memories, a subtle tension that none of them fully understood. Marcus kept trying to steer their conversations back to happier times, but his hands trembled each time he poured a drink. Tyler stared at the flames longer than necessary, lost in thoughts he hadn't shared. Evan walked to the door repeatedly, listening to the wind, convinced he heard footsteps crunching in the snow. The deeper the night became, the more the cabin seemed to amplify everything. Every insecurity, every fear, every regret. The isolation acted like a magnifying glass, enlarging what the men had kept buried for years. Psychologists who later reviewed the case called it group isolation disorientation, a phenomenon where emotional vulnerability and physical seclusion combine to heighten paranoia and intensify reactions. But at that moment, the men weren't thinking about psychology. They were thinking about the strange sense that they were not entirely alone. Around 10:45 p.m., Tyler stepped outside for air. He walked only a few feet from the porch, but immediately stopped. The forest was motionless, yet he felt as though dozens of eyes were watching him from the dark. The wind grew quiet. The silence pressed against his ears. He could hear his heartbeat, too loud, too fast. When he returned inside, he locked the door quickly. He didn't say what he felt. He didn't want the others to think he was imagining things. But he wasn't the only one unsettled. Evan had been observing the cabin walls, noticing scratch marks near the doorframe, marks that weren't there when they were teenagers. Marcus insisted animals must have done it, but Evan wasn't convinced. The scratches felt deliberate, almost patterned, as if someone or something had tried to claw its way inside. By midnight, the emotional weight of the place began to surface. The men talked less. They drank more. The silence between sentences grew longer. And every now and then, one of them would look toward the window, drawn by an instinct they couldn't explain. The investigators would later describe this night as the beginning of the unraveling, not because of anything supernatural or mystical, but because the cabin's isolation forced the men to face truths they had avoided. Did I end the city? Distance diluted their emotions. In the forest, everything felt louder: grief, anger, guilt, fear. And in that emotional pressure, bonds can strengthen or fracture completely. At one point, Evan asked a question he had been holding inside since the funeral. Why didn't we stay close? What really happened to us? The cabin dimmed into silence. Tyler looked away. Marcus struggled for an answer. This was not the simple reunion they had imagined. This was a confrontation with their past, with their failures, with emotional wounds they had never treated. And in the corner of the room, the old carved initials seemed to mock them. 3 letters once bound by friendship, now barely holding together. Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering through the trees. The cabin creaked as if adjusting to the weight of their emotions. And the night grew colder still, wrapping the men in a psychological tension that tightened with every passing minute. They didn't know it then, but the cabin, this place of secrets, was doing what isolation always does, revealing truths too heavy to carry. and by the time dawn approached, the emotional storm brewing inside those wooden walls had already set their fate into motion. The cabin didn't cause the tragedy, but it awakened everything that would lead to it. By the time the clock crept toward midnight, the atmosphere inside the cabin had changed. What began as a nostalgic reunion had become something heavier, dense with unspoken truths and emotions none of the men were prepared to face. The fire crackled, throwing restless shadows across the wooden walls, and the bitter December cold pressed hard against the windows. It felt as though the entire forest was holding its breath, listening. Marcus poured another drink, his movements slower now. Tyler leaned back in his chair, staring at the flames with a distant look in his eyes. Evan sat upright, hands clasped together, as though bracing for something unseen. None of them said it out loud, but the night had taken a turn. What investigators later described as the psychological tipping point began with a simple confession, one that peeled back layers of pain none of them knew were still raw. It was Evan who spoke first. He had tried to mask his grief since they arrived, but the silence of the cabin, its heaviness, its stillness, had stripped away whatever emotional armor he brought with him. And as the fire cast a trembling glow across his face, he finally surrendered to the truth weighing on his chest. "I feel like I lost more than my mom," he whispered. "I feel like I lost both of you too." Tyler's eyes flicked upward, guilt flashing across them. Marcus inhaled sharply. The words cut deeper than Evan intended, but they were honest, too honest to ignore it. I end the city. They were allowed to avoid feelings. In this cabin, the truth demanded acknowledgement. Marcus set his glass down, struggling to maintain composure. "I know we drifted," he admitted. "We all had our own mess going on. But losing your mom, it woke me up. It reminded me how fragile everything is." Tyler said nothing at first. His silence stretched long, uncomfortable, unsettling. The flames danced in his eyes, reflecting something darker, something heavy. Finally, he exhaled shakily. "You think you lost us," he murmured, "but I've been losing myself for years." Evan and Marcus exchanged a glance, one of surprise, concern, and fear. Tyler had always been the quiet one, the deep thinker, the emotional glue of their trio. Hearing him speak like that sent a chill through the room. The truth was out now, and with truth comes vulnerability. And with vulnerability comes danger. The air in the cabin tightened. The forest outside seemed to go silent again. No wind, no rustling branches, no distant animal calls. Tyler's confession stayed suspended in the room like smoke that refused to clear. Then came the moment investigators later identified as the emotional fuse. Marcus leaned forward, eyes intense, voice low. "Then let's not lose each other again. Let's promise that no matter what happens, we stay connected. That none of us faces anything alone anymore." It was meant to be comforting, but something about his tone, desperate, almost pleading, shifted the meaning. Tyler blinked slowly, as though weighing the weight of the suggestion. Evan frowned, uncertain. "What do you mean?" Evan asked carefully. Marcus didn't hesitate. "A pact," he said. "Something binding. Something real. We're brothers. Let's swear we never abandon each other again." Tyler's shoulders tensed. Evan leaned back uneasily. This was no longer casual talk. It was a vow being shaped in the dark. Marcus continued, the fire reflecting off his determined expression. "We've lost years, guys. We've let life separate us. That ends tonight. We face everything together from now on." Tyler looked down at his hands. Evan swallowed hard. Psychologists later reviewing the case said Marcus's emotional state showed signs of dependency and unresolved trauma, intensified by grief and isolation. In his mind, the pact wasn't symbolic. It was survival, control, a way to make sure he wouldn't be left alone again. But Evan and Tyler didn't see the depth of his desperation. Not yet. Tyler finally broke the silence. "What exactly are we promising?" Marcus's reply was soft, but chilling. "Loyalty, honesty, unity, no secrets, no abandonment. Whatever anyone is facing, we all face it." It sounded noble. It sounded hopeful. But beneath the surface, something in Marcus's voice trembled with obsession. Evan hesitated. He wanted closeness, yes, but not binding vows forged under emotional strain. Still, guilt tugged at him. Grief clouded his judgment. "Okay," Evan whispered. "If it helps us repair what we lost, I'm in." Tyler nodded slowly. "Me too." Marcus exhaled, relieved, almost euphoric. And then he raised his glass. "To us," he said. "To the Pact." The others raised their glasses as well, though their hands trembled. Investigators would later note that at this moment, all three men began interpreting the Pact differently. Marcus saw it as absolute, a contract, something sacred and unbreakable. Evan saw it as emotional support, a symbolic gesture to heal old wounds. Tyler saw it as a lifeline, something fragile, something he feared he could break. In psychological terms, the Pact created a triangle of instability, three emotional expectations pulling against one another. And in the isolated environment of the cabin, with alcohol lowering inhibition and grief clouding judgment, this imbalance became dangerous. They clinked their glasses. The fire flickered sharply, the loudest sound in the room. Evan flinched. Tyler exhaled shakily. Marcus stared into the flames as though seeing something none of them could. What happened next was small, insignificant on the surface, but tremendous in impact. The wind outside slammed against the cabin door with a deep, echoing thud. Evan jumped. Tyler froze. Marcus didn't move. They waited. But the forest stayed silent. And from that moment on, the Pact was no longer a comforting agreement. It had become something else. Something heavier. Something binding in a way none of them fully understood. When they finally extinguished the lights and prepared to sleep, the mood in the cabin was different. Not relaxed, not hopeful, but electrically charged, with tension and fear. Tyler lay awake long after the others fell asleep, staring into the darkness, replaying the Pact in his mind. A whisper of regret settled in his chest, a fear that he had agreed to something he wasn't sure he could keep. Evan dreamed restlessly, haunted by memories of loss. Marcus slept soundly, too soundly, investigators would later say, as though he had gained something powerful, as though the Pact fulfilled something deep inside him. Outside, the forest stood still. Inside, the emotional fractures deepened, and with the Pact now sealed, the path to tragedy had finally begun. Morning arrived in Pine Ridge Forest without sunlight. A thick gray sky pressed low over the treetops, and the forest was wrapped in a muted quiet that felt unnatural, like the world was holding itself still. Inside the cabin, the air was heavy, unsettled, as though the emotional tension from the previous night had seeped into the walls. Evan was the first awake. He lay staring at the wooden beams overhead, replaying the Pact in his mind, the promises, the desperation in Marcus's voice, and the strange pressure he felt to agree. Part of him regretted it. Another part wondered whether it was simply the grief talking. Tyler was already sitting by the window, fully dressed, staring out into the forest with a tight expression. He didn't acknowledge Evan at first, which was unusual. Tyler always greeted softly, gently. Today he seemed far away. Marcus was still asleep, breathing deeply, almost peacefully. Too peacefully, Evan approached Tyler with a cautious voice. "You okay?" Tyler didn't turn. "Yeah," he whispered. But the lie was obvious. Evan sat near him. "What's on your mind?" Tyler hesitated for several seconds before speaking. I feel like we agreed to something we didn't understand." Evan swallowed. "The Pact." Tyler nodded. His fingers tapped nervously against the window pane. "It wasn't a normal promise, Evan. It felt intense. Like Marcus wasn't asking. He was demanding." Evan looked toward the sleeping Marcus. "I think he's just scared of losing us again." Tyler finally turned his head, eyes dark with something deeper than fear. "That's exactly what scares me." It was the first sign investigators later identified as the psychological divergence. The moment Tyler recognized the Pact as something binding, something controlling, while Evan still tried to interpret it as symbolic, to be why the time Marcus woke up, the cabin atmosphere had already shifted. Evan tried to act normal, making coffee, but Tyler's body language was tense. He avoided eye contact, avoided conversation, avoided Marcus entirely. Marcus noticed. "Is something wrong?" he asked, voice clipped. Tyler shrugged, trying to appear neutral. "No, just tired." Marcus didn't believe him. Breakfast was quiet. Too quiet. Each man was trapped in his thoughts, fears, doubts, and interpretations of the pact pulling their minds in different directions. And then everything changed with one small moment. Tyler stepped outside to get fresh air. He had only been gone a minute when Marcus leaned toward Evan and said, "He's pulling away. I knew he'd break the pact first." The sentence froze Evan. It wasn't just what Marcus said. It was how he said it. Possessive. Cold. Accusing. "Marcus," Evan whispered, "it's been less than a day." "I don't think Tyler is." Marcus cut him off sharply. "I saw it in his eyes last night. He's hiding something." That's how betrayal starts. Evan frowned deeply. "Betrayal?" "Marcus, this is Tyler we're talking about. He's just overwhelmed." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's not an excuse. A pact is a pact." Investigators would later call this moment the emotional fracture line, the point where Marcus began treating the pact as a rigid contract, while Evan and Tyler saw it slipping out of control. Tyler returned to the cabin and immediately sensed the tension. "What?" he asked, suspicious. Marcus stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You okay?" he asked slowly. "Yes," Tyler responded, but the defensive tone betrayed his unease. Evan tried to lighten the tone, suggesting they take a walk to clear the air. And so, reluctantly, they stepped into the cold forest. The snow crunched beneath their boots. The trees towered overhead. The silence between them grew heavier with every step. Halfway down the trail, Tyler stopped abruptly. "I need to say something," he said. Marcus turned sharply. "What?" Tyler took a breath. "About the pact. I think we rushed into it. We were emotional. Maybe we should slow down and talk about what it really means." Marcus stiffened. Evan felt his stomach drop. Tyler continued, trying to be gentle. "I'm not saying I want out. I'm saying we didn't define it clearly. And that's..." Marcus exploded. "You see," he snapped. "I knew it. I knew you were going to be the first to walk away. You can't commit to anything, Tyler. Not even your own life." Tyler's face changed instantly. Shock, then anger. "Marcus, that's not fair. I'm trying to talk. You're twisting it." "I'm not twisting anything." Marcus shouted. "You agreed. You made a vow. And now you're already looking for loopholes." Evan stepped between them. "Stop. Both of you. You're misunderstanding each other." But Marcus wasn't listening. He leaned forward, eyes burning with accusation. "You're breaking the pact. You're betraying us." Something inside Tyler snapped, not violently but painfully. "Don't use that word against me," he whispered. "Don't make this into something dark." Marcus scoffed. "It is dark, Tyler. That's what loyalty is. You don't get to walk in and out when you feel unstable." The irony of that statement, Marcus calling someone else unstable, was not lost on Evan. Tyler's voice cracked. "I didn't break anything. I'm trying to understand it." Marcus took a step closer, face inches away. "You don't understand loyalty. You never did." That was the breaking point. Tyler shoved him. Not hard, but enough to create distance. The gesture was instinctive, defensive. Marcus stumbled backward over a tree root and hit the ground. For a moment, nobody moved. The forest was completely silent. Marcus slowly stood up, breathing heavily. His expression warped with something that frightened Evan deeply. Not anger, but obsession. Tyler backed away, shaking. "That was an accident." "Marcus, I'm sorry." Marcus didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just stared. And in that stare, investigators later found the beginning of the violent spiral that would follow. Back at the cabin, the tension didn't fade. It thickened. Evan tried desperately to mediate, but Marcus remained cold and Tyler remained terrified. Every small movement, every glance, every sigh felt like a trigger waiting to explode. That night, Marcus wrote something in a small notebook Evan didn't know he brought. Tyler locked himself in the bathroom for nearly an hour. Evan paced the living room, feeling the emotional collapse tightening around them. The pact, meant to heal them, had turned into a weapon. A measure of loyalty. A test none of them could truly pass. And the cabin, already heavy with secrets, had now become a pressure chamber. To be by the end of the night, the friendships were no longer fragile. They were fractured, and fractured things break. Night fell over Pine Ridge Forest with a suffocating heaviness. The trees outside the cabin swayed in a low, mournful rhythm, and the temperature dropped so sharply that the glass windows trembled. Inside, the air was thick with tension, so thick it felt like a presence in the room, watching, waiting. Nobody spoke for almost an hour after the confrontation in the forest. Tyler sat at the far end of the couch, his hands trembling. Evan paced in slow circles, whispering prayers under his breath. Marcus sat at the dining table, motionless, staring at the notebook he had been writing in earlier. The Pact had created a triangle of fear. Now, fear was turning into suspicion. And suspicion in isolation is a dangerous thing. Around 8:50 p.m., Evan approached Marcus cautiously. "Can we talk?" he asked gently. Marcus didn't respond. Didn't blink. Didn't move. The fire cast a flickering orange glow across his face, revealing an expression that chilled Evan more than the winter wind outside. It wasn't anger anymore. It was fixation. Evan tried again. "Marcus, we're worried about you." At that, Marcus finally turned his head, but the look in his eyes was not relief or even acknowledgement. It was accusation. "You two talked about me behind my back," he said quietly. "Didn't you?" Tyler's head jerked up. "What?" "No, Marcus," nobody said. Marcus slammed his fist on the table, so hard the lantern shook. "Don't lie. I heard you. You think I'm controlling you. You think I'm some kind of threat." "Marcus," Evan whispered, his voice trembling, "we're your friends. We love you. We're just worried. Worried that I expect too much." Marcus snapped. "Worried that loyalty actually means something to me?" There it was, the emotional trigger that investigators later described as the Pact corruption point. Marcus no longer saw the Pact as unity. He saw it as a test. A test he believed the others were already failing. Tyler stood up slowly, palms open. "No one is betraying you. No one wants to hurt you. We're just scared." "That's the problem," Marcus hissed. "You're scared, but I'm determined." The moment the word determined left his lips, everything shifted, like a storm that had been building, finally breaking. Evan stepped between them. "Marcus, please. We can fix this. Let's sit down." Marcus shoved him aside. Not violently, but violently enough. Evan lost his balance and hit the edge of the couch. Tyler moved instinctively toward Evan, and Marcus interpreted the movement as aggression. "What are you doing?" Marcus shouted, backing toward the kitchen counter. Tyler froze. "I'm helping him." "Marcus, stop twisting everything." But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. His mind was spiraling, feeding on fear, feeding on the belief that his friends had turned against him. The isolation of the cabin amplified everything. His grief morphed into paranoia. And paranoia, when cornered, becomes dangerous. Marcus grabbed a fireplace poker from beside the hearth. A long iron rod, heavy, solid. Evan gasped. "Marcus, put that down. Please." Tyler backed away, shaking uncontrollably. Marcus lifted the poker, not swinging it, just holding it, gripping it too tightly. "You made a pact," he said, voice breaking. "You promised you'd never abandon me, that we'd face everything together. Now you're trying to leave. Both of you." "Marcus," Tyler whispered, "nobody's leaving. You're lying." Those two words sealed their fate. Tyler, panicking, reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for his phone, hoping to record Marcus, hoping to calm him later. But Marcus only saw a sudden hand movement that he raised the poker, startled. Tyler flinched backward instinctively. And in that split second of terror, misunderstanding spiraled into violence. Marcus lunged forward. Tyler tried to dodge, but the cabin was too small. The poker struck his shoulder, sending him crashing into the wooden floor. Evan screamed. Tyler cried out in shock, more from fear than pain. Marcus raised the poker again. "Stop." Evan yelled, grabbing Marcus's arm. But Marcus, in a panic-fueled frenzy, swung blindly, tearing his arm free. The momentum sent the poker flying across the room and clattering against the wall. Evan tried to restrain him, but Marcus shoved him again, this time hard. Evan stumbled backward into the edge of the stone hearth. The crack of impact echoed through the cabin. Evan collapsed unconscious. For a moment, the room fell into complete silence. Tyler, shaking violently, crawled to Evan's side. Blood trickled down the back of Evan's head, a sight that shattered Tyler's control completely. "Marcus," Tyler whispered, voice breaking, "look what you've done." Marcus froze. His breathing quickened. His hands trembled. "I didn't, Evan." "Evan, get up. Get up." He dropped to his knees beside Evan, touching his shoulder, shaking him. But Evan didn't move, and something inside Marcus snapped again, but this time, not with anger, with terror. Crushing, overwhelming terror. "I didn't mean to," he whispered, rocking back and forth. "I didn't mean to." Tyler pulled Evan close, tears spilling down his face. "Marcus, we need help. We need to get him outside. We need to go." At the word go, Marcus stiffened. "You're leaving," he whispered. "You're going to abandon me?" "No, Marcus, you're breaking the pact." Tyler's breath hitched. What happened next was described by investigators as the emotional point of no return. Tyler stood slowly, trying to get to the door. Marcus stood too. Tyler, his voice was no longer angry. It was desperate, lost, breaking. "Don't leave me." Tyler shook his head, crying. "I'm not leaving you. I'm getting help." Marcus's face twisted. Fear into rage, rage into grief. "No, you can't. You promised." Tyler stepped toward the door. Marcus grabbed the fallen poker. There was no thinking, no decision, only panic, pure, blinding panic. He swung. The blow struck Tyler across the temple. A sickening, hollow sound filled the room. Tyler staggered once, twice, collapsed beside Evan. Marcus dropped the poker. His breath came in broken gasps. His hands shook uncontrollably. Tyler, get up, please." But Tyler didn't move. And in the eerie silence that followed, Marcus understood something for the first time. He hadn't protected the pact. He had destroyed it. The final hours inside the cabin were silent, unbearably silent. Marcus sat between the bodies of his best friends, rocking, crying, whispering apologies into the darkness. By dawn, guilt became unbearable. And when investigators found the scene days later, they discovered Marcus near the cabin entrance, cold, still, and gone by his own hand. 3 friends entered Pine Ridge to heal. None of them left. The pact ended the way all corrupted vows do, not with unity, but with tragedy. When Pine Ridge deputies received the missing persons report on Monday morning, it seemed routine. 3 men overdue from a cabin trip, no phone signal, families unable to reach them. But something about the mother's voice on the call stayed with the dispatcher. Something in the tremble, the urgency, the instinctive fear that only loved ones can feel before anyone else knows something is wrong. By noon, a search team was deployed. The forest was blanketed in a sheet of dull white snow, and the wind carried a sharp chill that cut through clothing and skin alike. The deeper the officers went, the more oppressive the quiet became, as if Pine Ridge itself was holding its breath. The cabin came into view just after 1:40 p.m. At first glance, nothing seemed disturbed. No footprints near the road. No signs of struggle outside. Smoke no longer drifted from a chimney. Everything appeared still, silent, frozen in time. It was Deputy Holloway who approached the front door first. He pushed, expecting resistance, but the door opened easily, creaking faintly, like the cabin was exhaling a long-held secret. The warmth of the interior hit them first. The fireplace had long died out, but the last embers suggested someone had been there recently. A coffee mug sat half-finished. A coat lay draped over a chair. And then they saw the first sign of something wrong, a notebook lying open on the table. The final sentence written in shaky, frantic handwriting. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." The officers exchanged looks. Deputy Holloway called out, "Evan? Marcus? Tyler?" No answer. They searched the living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms. Nothing. But then they noticed a faint trail of blood on the wooden floor, thin, smeared, almost wiped clean, but not quite. It led toward the back of the cabin. And when they followed it, they found the scene that would haunt the department for years. Evan lay near the stone fireplace, eyes closed, head resting in dried blood. The blow to his skull had been fatal, but unintentional. Tyler lay only a few feet away, his body curled slightly as though he had fallen mid-step, the side of his face bruised from the impact. Both were cold, still, gone. For a moment, the officers stood frozen. The only sound was the crackle of old wood settling under the weight of winter. The third friend, Marcus, was nowhere in sight. Holloway stepped outside, scanning the tree. Something close to fear prickled at his neck. Snow crunched faintly behind the cabin, almost too soft to notice. They followed it. About 20 yards from the cabin, beneath the bowed branches of a cedar tree, they found Marcus. He was kneeling in the snow, his hands folded in his lap as though in prayer. His body leaned gently forward, hair dusted with frost. A calm expression rested on his face, almost peaceful. Beside him, the poker lay half-buried in snow. He had taken his own life. The forest was silent, completely, unbearably silent. For investigators, the next hours were a storm of photographs, measurements, evidence bags, and hushed conversations. Yet none of it felt real. None of it matched the image of three best friends smiling in childhood photos found inside the cabin. One of the most critical pieces of evidence was Marcus's notebook. Every page told a story the investigators hadn't expected. Earlier entries were reflective, nostalgic, hopeful. But as they flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. The Pact appeared midway, for words underlined twice. We face everything together. At first, it read like a promise made by a man desperate to save a fading bond. But the later entries, written in darker ink and shakier handwriting, revealed a deepening obsession. Tyler doesn't believe in it. Evan thinks I'm too intense. They promised. Why are they pulling away? If they leave, I will have nothing left. I can't let them break it. And the final page. I lost them. I lost myself. I was trying to hold us together, but I destroyed everything. To understand what triggered the violence, investigators consulted psychologists who spent weeks dissecting the emotional dynamics at play. Their conclusion was sobering. The cabin didn't kill them. Isolation didn't kill them. The Pact did. Not because of its words, but because of how each man interpreted them. Marcus saw it as a binding contract, a promise that would fix his grief and abandonment issues. Evan saw it as emotional healing, a step toward reconnection. Tyler saw it as pressure on already unstable shoulders. 3 interpretations, 3 expectations, no alignment. An emotional imbalance of that magnitude, intensified by isolation, alcohol, fear, and unresolved trauma, created a psychological pressure few can withstand. In their final report, investigators wrote, "The tragedy was not born from hatred, but from love pushed beyond its breaking point." The community was shaken. 3 funerals were held in the same week. Evan's family remembered him as the gentle soul who always put others first. Tyler's family spoke of his quiet strength and private struggles. Marcus's family mourned a son overwhelmed by pain he never learned how to express. But one particular moment stayed with investigators, the caretaker's statement. When asked if he noticed anything unusual, Isaac Reeves reportedly replied, "Places that hold memories also hold emotion." That cabin had seen joy and it had seen sorrow. Sometimes, when people bring their pain into a place that's already heavy, the walls can't hold it, so it spills out. Whether he meant it literally or metaphorically, no one could say. But the cabin was abandoned after the investigation. Its door nailed shut, its windows shuttered, its history left to sleep beneath the shadows of Pine Ridge Forest. And today, hikers who pass through the area occasionally report a strange silence near the site, as though the forest still remembers what happened, as though it remembers the Pact. The story of Evan Marcus and Tyler is one investigators revisit often, not as a tale of violence, but as a study of vulnerability, emotional imbalance, and the devastating consequences of unspoken wounds. 3 men entered the woods seeking healing. Their hearts, shaken by grief and guilt, reached for closeness. But the Pact meant to unite them became the catalyst for their undoing. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous promises are the ones made in pain, and the most tragic endings come from the places where help should have been asked, but it wasn't.